Hi there. Welcome to the Right Here, Right Now live show. This show has one simple question. What's on your heart and mind right here, right now in this moment? We explore the depths and breadths of our humanity through that one simple question over the course of 30 to 45 minutes. I hope that you'll join us. I hope you'll enjoy the exploration. And this tune was created for me personally by the incredible Peter Griffiths, one half of the amazing Mind Takeaway. Do let us know what you think. Let us know what you take away. And of course, we always welcome challenges too. Hope to see you on the exploration. Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I hope you're all doing well. Thanks for joining me. Gary Turner here, founder of Hexo Change and host of the Right Here, Right Now live show. Got a super interesting guest for you today. Douglas Noll is a lawyer, speaker, and author of a new book called De-Escalate. Before I bring Doug online for you, let me just tell you a little bit about him. So he's an award-winning lawyer, mediator, author, teacher, and speaker. Mediated thousands of conflicts, which I think, where we are right now in our civilization, I think I'm so excited actually to hear how Doug does this. Serving as a civil lawyer for over 12 years, he's passionate about understanding human conflict. His groundbreaking work in de-escalating anger in the potentially violent confrontations has transformed lives everywhere. So I'm going to bring Doug on now. And welcome to the Right Here, Right Now live show. Doug Noll, how are you?
I'm great, Gary. Thanks for having me on.
Not at all. How was your weekend? I guess, what is it for you? Is it 10 o'clock in the morning, your side?
Oh, no. It's 7 in the morning here in Central California.
Wow.
We had a fire yesterday, kind of exciting. And fortunately, we were upwind of the fire. It was right across the road, burned a couple of 100 acres. And then I did a dinner party for 14 people last night. So it was quite the day.
Welcome to the new week.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, look, I've given a bit of an introduction to yourself, Doug, and this show, as I mentioned in the introduction, we seed with one really simple question, but it tends to take us in quite some direction sometimes. So I'm really intrigued. Following a dinner party yesterday, what's on your heart and mind right here, right now in this moment? I'm really intrigued.
Well, what's in my heart and mind right now is that I feel very blessed. I live an amazing life in a beautiful part of the world and serve humanity every day in the work that I do. And I couldn't have designed my life to be any better than it is right now. I'm really quite fortunate. It didn't start that way. My life was very tough. I was born into affluence, but I was born with a lot of disabilities. I was born blind, nearly blind, deaf, crippled, couldn't walk till I was 3 years old. So it was rough for the first 50 years of my life. But I was born with a good intellect and ended up going from California. I'm a native Californian, going back east to Dartmouth College, graduated, came back, went to law school, practiced law for 22 years, and then decided that wasn't right and went back to school, got my master's degree in peacemaking and conflict studies, and left the practice and became a peacemaker. And that's what I've been doing for the last 22 years.
Thanks for sharing the background. So there's so much I'm interested to dive into, Doug, but I think particularly, if I may ask, what was that pivot point for you? What was the trigger for you to go from practicing law into that really intentional shift towards that sort of conflict resolution? Was there a very clear inner compass of Doug that took
it
you
was
that direction?
It had been building for quite some time. As a lawyer, when I was practicing law, I knew I wasn't integrated. I was being a lawyer on one part, but inside I was something different. And I took up a whole bunch of different things to try to figure. I didn't know what I was doing, but I was actually trying to find out how to integrate myself. So I took up the martial arts, eventually got a second degree black belt, then took up Tai Chi. And it was Tai Chi that really shifted me, because Tai Chi had two paradoxes. The softer you are, the stronger you are. The more vulnerable you are, the more powerful you are. Soft to be strong, vulnerable to be powerful. And that really shifted me. And one day in the mid-90s, I was trying a case and thought came to me in Austin in the courtroom cross-examining somebody, and that thought came to me, what am I doing in here? And so that's when I really evaluated what I'd done so far into my late 40s. How many people had I really served? And I couldn't count many people. 5 people, I think, that it really felt like I'd served in 22 years. I said, nah, I'm not going to do that anymore. And learned about a new master's degree program at a local university and enrolled. And so for 3 years, I was a full-time graduate student, a part-time law professor, and a full-time trial lawyer. And it changed my life. It literally changed my life. And ultimately, I walked out of the law firm, gave a week's notice to my partners, and just quit. And opened up my peacemaking practice and became a peacemaker and a mediator. And it was the best decision I ever made. It was amazing.
Wow, I'm just so intrigued by this practice with the Tai Chi, and that, what opened up for you through that? Because I guess did you start the Tai Chi? Was there already this sort of curious inquiry, Doug, of like there's got to be more to life than this, or was it just literally going through that practice?
Well, shifted? It was the practice. It was my kung fu teacher fired me. He said, "You're too arrogant. You're too much of an asshole." And I mean,
brilliant.
It was all true. And he said, "Go learn Tai Chi. Don't come back until you master Tai Chi." And of course, you never mastered Tai Chi, so it was a death sentence. But I studied Tai Chi as a martial art, not as a contemplative practice. And as a martial art, it's extremely vicious and deadly. It's a deadly art. It's the oldest martial art. All martial arts come from Tai Chi. And it was through that process of moving very slowly and flowing and learning how to absorb energy and push energy out that things started to shift in me. And that's when I finally realized that the adversarial nature of trial practice was not right for me, and I could do better doing other things. And that was really the big moment. I mean, it was an evolution, obviously. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, I left the practice of law, but I still carried all that law baggage with me. And so it took a number of years of doing a lot of work on myself to finally move into the real Doug Noll, if you will. And so today, I've never been happier. I couldn't say that for the first 50 or 55 years of my life, but it was quite the process. And I tell people, if I could do it, anybody can do it, because I was a wreck.
But I appreciate you sharing that, right? So already there's these patterns that I'm seeing. We'll come towards the book, De-Escalate. I want to hear more about that for sure. But there's this really powerful blend, like say, early stage challenge, right? This learning about vulnerability, like the power of vulnerability, realizing about energy states. Like, this is not the stuff we're traditionally taught, is it, Doug?
No, it's not. No, I became a healer, energy healer, and I had over 300 documented healings. And I mean, for a lawyer, a skeptical, hardcore trial lawyer, this is a radical shift. And I experienced things that science can't explain. And, and so my kind of expanded my perspective and perception of the world, and decided that I didn't want to be limited by being a trial lawyer anymore. And so that's when I really started to grow. And it's been an interesting experience ever since. I've been very, very fortunate. I don't make nearly as much money as I used to make, but I don't care. I don't need any. I pay my bills. I'm good. I don't need the big car and the big house and the status and all that crap. I just don't need it. And once you realize that stuff's not important anymore, then life becomes a lot easier.
It's so interesting. So I'm 46 in September this year, Doug, and I've been on my own version of a journey for the last 7 years.
There you go.
And that point you just shared, which is really critical for me, was about 6 years ago, where I had the car, had the salary, had everything the outside world had socialized us mattered, right? Sat there hollow and empty, going, great, got it all now. So what? And what else?
Exactly.
And it was just bizarre though, right? Because that moment, which sounds like you've had that as well in your own way as well, is that how have we all been so duped for so long? to focus on these outside things, right? To make us feel whole.
Well, I think that, I mean, I think it's just part of our culture. And if we're programmed by our culture and we don't have the opportunity to step back and look at it, we're programmed to do this. And we get sucked into it because we don't know any better. But for you and me, you get to a point where you say, this is not working for me anymore, right? And so then you got to step back and look at life and say, what's really important here? And there are a few of us that get to do that. And we step back and reevaluate, and all of a sudden we realize this is not important. And what is important? Service to humanity is important. So let's do that. And then your life changes forever. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the key. And so for people who are wondering how you do this, you just got to decide, am I really happy? Am I really serving people? Am I really serving myself, my family? And if not, then what can I do? And do I really need the big car and the big house and the big mortgage and, all that stuff? And the answer is no. It takes courage to make that decision. But once you make the decision, then life flows quite gracefully after that. It's amazing how it works.
It's lovely. I've got a systemic guide called Samantha, based in the Philippines, Doug. And you spoke really powerfully. It's almost like we've been conditioned to fight life, literally. If we look at last weekend, sadly, again, and other aspects I'm sure that you deal with day to day, right? Like we've been conditioned to fight the very thing that we all are innately, which is just bizarre.
That's right. It's weird. It's weird. And I grew up in affluence, so I mean, I know money, but it's just we put so much importance on something that's so meaningless. Who was Tim Ferriss said Tim Ferriss wrote, the 4-Hour Workweek or something like that, made a lot of money, but he says, I don't know a centimillionaire or a billionaire who's happy. Think about that. Enormously wealthy people, not happy people. So money's not it. Money is not the answer.
It's funny, don't do you follow Russell Brand at all, the UK comedian? He's quite he's interesting. So he did an interview or done some research, and it was actually the psychiatrists and the psychologists are the top billionaires globally, and exactly that comment came back time and time again, is that the unhappiness of most billionaires, apparently, according to their psychologists.
Very few of them are happy, and it's sad. I mean, they've got all this material wealth, so they're financially secure, but actually the wealth puts them into a cage, because once you're that wealthy, then you got to have security, and you can't go out in public, and you've got to be, protected, and because of the wealth, and so it becomes a gilded cage. No, thank you.
Yeah. No thanks. I love it. So before we come on to, I want to hear about the book, Doug, but there's a quote you just shared, and I can't let it out of my experience of life. You said, pretty much quote, I experienced something that science could not explain.
Oh yeah.
Do you mind speaking to that a little bit, like what that means for you in the moment as a phrase? Because that is counterintuitive to my day job in the chemicals industry, where it's so like, give us the evidence, prove it. We need the scientific rigor, right?
Right. Well, of course, today I teach we're 98% emotional and only 2% rational, and so we're not rational beings; we're emotional beings. But that experience flowed from Tai Chi, and Tai Chi is the study of martial art, but the art is all about learning how to use this energy called Chi or prana or whatever word you use for it. And at first, I thought it was just all old Chinese mysticism that didn't have any grounding. And then all of a sudden, I started experiencing the energy myself, and I was able to blow out candles with my hand and move business cards across the table with my energy, and that led me into healing and becoming a pranic healer and healing people with energy. I mean, palpable healing. And you can't explain this stuff by science. I'm a lawyer, a trained skeptic, and I was seeing this stuff happen. I was doing it myself, and said, how do you explain this to people? I said, well, you can't. We don't know why this works. We can go back to the ancient writings, and they tried to explain it, but they didn't know what was happening. They just had this experience. And so it sort of opened my eyes to the idea that science is great. It has a lot of power to it, but it also has limitations, and that we can't allow ourselves to stay in. Rationality is bounded. We have bounded rationality inside the guardrails, but outside of that rationality, there's a whole other existence. So we need to know when to stay within the guardrails of bounded rationality, but then we also have to be able to be outside the guardrails and to experience things that rationality will not explain or talk about. And that's what it means to be human. And that was the experience I had. And it was, a huge eye-opening experience. And I've had people walk out of my workshops where I said, okay, now we're going to start manipulating energy. And literally people just their eyes got like big as saucers, said, I can't accept this because it's outside of Newtonian physics and I don't get it. And you can't explain the science behind it. And this is too paradigm shifting. I can't handle it. And the cognitive dissonance was so great, they just got up and walked out. Pretty funny.
I hope they paid first, Doug.
Pardon me now?
Have they paid first?
Oh, absolutely. And a lot of money. You paid a lot of money too.
Fantastic. I love it. No, thanks for sharing your view on that. It's such an important point because I'm someone that works still within the corporate space, but also does some stuff alongside that.
Right.
And it's a really difficult conversation to have, particularly in the West still.
It is. And so that's why, people don't pick up on it, and I don't talk about it a lot. Here I am on a public podcast with you talking about stuff that I rarely talk about other than to my wife. But, because it's hard for people to get their heads around the idea that there are these subtle energies that exist that too subtle for science to measure. And yet you can see the effects visually and physically, and there's no explanation for it. It's not magic. There's obviously something going on, but what it is, we really don't know. We just know that there's an effect. So
I love it. And I think as we go into your book now, because I do want to come on to that, I just really appreciate you sharing in the moment that, because what we're modeling as two happen to be white guys is vulnerability, curiosity, listening, empathy, energy. Like that's the narrative we need to see more, I believe, in the mainstream, because it will help shift,
absolutely,
I think.
And our lives are devoted to service and helping people live full, authentic lives, and not being afraid of their emotions, and not being afraid to be who they are, not being closed off in the walls that we all have built around ourselves because of our the childhoods we grew up in, where we were taught not to be emotional, which is basically we're taught not to be a human being. That's essentially the teaching that is handed down from generation to generation. Don't be human. Stupid, ridiculous, but that's our culture.
I've literally got a massive Cheshire Green cat, because that was my first 39 years was that. I had adolescent bullied as a kid for 2 years continuously, and I just didn't know how to express that. I didn't know how to say, I'm in pain, or that hurt, or where do I go to for some help? I just didn't even know how to ask.
That's right. And your parents invalidated you, just like I was invalidated. We were all invalidated. So you 2 years old, you're out running around and you fall down and skin your knee and start to cry. What are you told? It doesn't hurt. Don't cry. Be a big boy. Rub dirt in it. We're completely denied our emotional experience. And that's devastating, and actually does damage to the brain, to the human brain, because children need parents who are emotional coaches, and most parents are not emotional coaches. 98% of all families are emotionally dysfunctional, and of course, an emotionally dysfunctional family does what? It produces emotionally dysfunctional adults, and that's what we have. Most all of us are, unless we go through some growth, we end up being emotionally dysfunctional, and that's what causes conflict, and that causes war and violence. And I've worked in some of the darkest places on the planet, in maximum security prisons, and you see the same patterns over and over and over again. So part of my thing right now is teaching people, don't invalidate your children. Validate their emotions. Emotions are what makes us human, not rationality.
Perfect segue into the book. It's as if we planned it, Doug. It's as if we planned it. So tell us a bit about the new book,
Well,
De-Escalate.
the book's been out for a while. It was published in 2017.
Okay.
It was my fourth book, so I've written a bunch of books. It came about. I didn't plan on writing it, but it was. I'm the co-founder of a project called Prison of Peace with my colleague Laurel Coffer, and for the last 12 years, we go into maximum security prisons and we train life inmates how to become peacemakers and mediators. Mm-hmm. And it's grown rapidly. We're in 15 California prisons. We're going to be in the full Connecticut system probably in another year. And we got a colleague who's doing it in 14 prisons in Greece, and we've got some colleagues in Italy and Nairobi. So it's growing internationally. But they kept asking me to write a book. My students, my incarcerated students, asked me to write a book that they could share with their families. So that led to the book. And it's based on a discovery I made in 2005 that completely changed my life, which is how do you calm an angry person in 90 seconds or less? And as a peacemaker and mediator, I get paid a lot of money to come into family business conflicts or organizational disputes or congregational disputes or community disputes, where there's intense conflict. And my job is to calm everybody down and try to help everybody resolve the conflict. But how do you calm people down? And even though I was trained by geniuses as when I was going through my master's program, they didn't have any really good de-escalation skills. It was all pretty intellectual. And what do you do? Well, I started studying neuroscience in the mid 90s as part of my master's program, and especially the neuroscience of emotions. And it had been percolating in me, and I came into this one conflict where it was really intense, and I didn't know what to do. I really had no tools. And the thought came to me, listen to the emotions. So I had the parties, instead of listening to their words, I said, ignore what they're saying, ignore what he's saying, just reflect back what he's feeling. And it was like magic. They calmed down in literally seconds, both of them. And 3 hours later, they walked out. They were a divorced couple, and they walked out holding hands to have lunch with each other. Whereas when things started, if there'd been knives on the table, there would have been blood on the floor, literally. It was amazing. And then 2 years later, Matthew Lieberman, who's a neuroscientist at UCLA, published the first seminal study on this, showing why this concept called affect labeling worked, and showed what actually happens in the human brain when you label somebody's emotions. And that established the science behind the practice. And so the book, De-Escalate, is really explaining my discovery, how it works, and then the science behind it, why the neuroscience, why does this work so well when nothing else does, and then takes you through the arc of life. How to use this with small children? What happens when you're dating, or you're married, or you're in the work or in school, or you have to deal with a sullen teenager. All the different things we all experience in life change when you learn how to listen somebody into existence. And that's what this is all about. And it's amazing. The book's done very well, and it's in 4 languages, second printing, and I still get royalty checks, so I'm quite happy about that.
It's fantastic. What I love about this as well, it's really coming back for me, Doug, towards this curiosity piece that you've continued to engender, right? Like, instead of just going, right, the prescribed science is X, or so-and-so's told me Y, it's like, actually, you had your own experience again.
Yeah, there are many ways you can describe me, and curiosity would be one. I'm a very curious person, and I'm not content with just being able to do something. I need to know why it works, because when you understand the why, then you can teach the how. And I'm all about teaching the how, and that's part of my background too, is knowing when I was a kid and I was crippled and blind and just a mess. How do you deal with a left-handed kid who's blind, can't walk, and is, partially deaf? How do you deal with a kid like that in the 50s? Nobody knew how to deal with me. And so I learned how to be a good teacher. And most people teach the what, and I always teach the how. I'm going to teach you how to do this, right? So you can do it too. And you can do it better than I can. And that's what I'm all about. So de-escalate was the formulation of how do I teach people to calm an angry person in 90 seconds or less? What are the actual steps that you go through to learn to do this? And everybody can do it, and it works. I mean, it's the foundational skill in our Prison of Peace project. It's the foundational skill we teach to our incarcerated people. And they use it to stop, they stop prison violence with it. It's that powerful.
It's amazing. And is this sort of, I get the sense this is a real ripple effect sort of practice as well, something that the guards can pick up, that the governors pick up. It's really something that's very accessible to every single human, right? Because we're human.
It is. I've come to conclude that it's the foundational skill of life. If you've got this skill, everything in your life changes. Everything changes. And no more fights and arguments ever. You just don't have any more fights and arguments in your life once you understand these skills. And it's that powerful. It's amazing. And it's interesting, when you're working in prisons, the correctional officers, what's good for the inmates is bad for them. So even though this is a skill that they could really use, the fact that we are training incarcerated people, an incarcerated population, means that it's good for them, so it must be bad for us. So they completely reject these principles completely. I mean, it's really funny to watch. Sad, but it's also funny. And then some of them start to pick it up a little bit, but the people in the community pick it up fast, and because they don't like violence. Most of them, almost all of them, hate violence, but they don't know any other way to resolve conflict other than pulling out a knife. But once you teach them there are other ways to deal with conflict other than violence, then they take to it like ducks to water. And it's quite amazing to watch the transformation that occurs.
I bet it's one of my questions, actually. Can you give us an example of, maybe a recent one, or, what was one of the most profound shifts that you experienced while doing this work? Is there an example, a story you can share with us?
Yeah, there are a lot of stories, but the story that I like to share is the very first one that we heard in prison. And Laurel and I, our first training was in the largest, most violent women's prison in the world, which was Valley State Prison for Women in Chowchilla, California, about an hour from where I live. And we'd been training 15 women, and we went in on week 5 or 6. Back then we were doing 1 day a week straight through. It was really pretty arduous. We've changed all that since then. But we walked in, and we were in this dingy. Prisons are not pleasant places to teach in, by the way. They're pretty difficult. Not a nice corporate environment at all. But we walked into the training room, and one of our students was there early, and she was kind of in the corner sobbing. So Laurel and I walked over, and Laurel knelt her and said, "What's going on?" And she told us the story. She said, "I had been in prison for 18 years. I'm in prison serving a life sentence, 25 years to life, because as a drunk driver, I killed a family of 4. And I came out of the accident completely unscathed, not a scratch on me, but I completely destroyed 4 lives, and a whole bunch of other people on top of that. And I had to give up my 3-year-old son to my sister to raise when I came to prison." And she said, "I've written him every week for 18 years, never heard from him, never got a phone call, never got a letter from him, never a visit. Everything I learned about my son was through my sister. And until earlier this week, I decided to write a letter based on what you and Doug have been teaching us. And I decided I would write a letter and list him into existence." So I just thought about everything he must feel about his mother abandoning him, going to prison, being selfish, being self-absorbed. And I just wrote, it was all about him and what he felt. And today, for the first time in 18 years, I got a letter back from him. And he was very angry. But at the end, he said, "I love you, Mom. And I'm bringing my girlfriend to visit you in 3 weeks." And she started crying again. And I just sort of sat there dumbstruck, saying, wow, how powerful is that? Estranged from her son for 18 years, writes one letter, who basically listens him into existence, and all of a sudden, the estrangement is over with. That's pretty amazing.
Wow, thank you for sharing. I literally had a reaction in my head, like close tear in my left eye. Like that, you can feel the impacts of what you just shared.
Yeah. And I've got hundreds of stories like that, but that was the first one. And that's when I really recognize that what I teach and what I talk about is powerfully transformative.
I'm really curious now about your dinner party last night. How many of these came out?
So I'm not a very social guy. My wife isn't social, but we live in a rural part of California in the mountains south of Yosemite National Park, and we have neighbors and friends, people we kind of know, acquaintances. So she said, what if let's have a dinner party, and we're going to make it so nice that nobody will ever invite us to their houses because they won't be able to compete with us. And I laughed and I said, okay. So I decided to do, and we have a small home, but it's a beautiful property. And so we had 12 people over last night, and I did tapas, Spanish small plates. So I started cooking at 3 p.m, and we did a 8-course tapas meal. And I've never cooked tapas before. I love to cook, but I'd never done tapas, and it turned out it was brilliant. It worked out really great. I'm a little tired today, but it was people were pretty blown away by it. So yeah, I don't think we'll get any reciprocal invitations, which is great.
Mission accomplished. Not just de-escalate.
That was the intention.
Couple.
That people were saying, when can we do this again?
Absolutely love it. Well, look, we're coming up to the end of our time together today, Doug. Absolutely fascinating journey and story. I'd love for you to maybe just offer some final words to those that may be watching live or watch this back at some point or listen to this back. Now, what's maybe one or two key invitations, apart from, of course, I'll put the link to the book in the show notes as well. But yeah, any other passing thoughts for people?
Here's I think the biggest insight that really changed my life was recognizing that our culture is wrong. Our culture is based on a myth, and the myth has caused more abuse and harm in human history than any other myth that I know of, and that is that we are rational beings. Once you get the insight that we humans are 98% emotional and only 2% rational, everything shifts. As long as you cling to the myth that we are rational beings, then you see behavior and it's confusing. It doesn't make sense. So that's not rational. They're acting irrationally. They're acting crazy. But when you look at it from the lens of they're emotional, all of a sudden, of course, they're being emotional. They're just being themselves. It's not a big deal. It changes everything. And that was the key insight that changed my life. And as I teach it, changes the lives of people that I teach. Because we are 98% emotional and only 2% rational. We are not rational beings. This myth of rationality just does not exist. And even in economics today, they don't talk about rationality anymore. Economists now are not talking about the concept of bounded rationality, where under very strict circumstances, controlled circumstances, we can engage in something that is called critical thinking or rational thinking. But it's such a narrow parameters that it doesn't apply to the rest of life. The rest of life is all emotional decision making. And so once we understand that we're emotional, now two things flow from that. One, we recognize that our emotions are our hidden genius. It's what makes us human, is our emotions. And now we have this hidden genius that's been suppressed by our culture. Emotions are bad and evil and irrational. Mm-hmm. Now that all of a sudden goes away. And now we can learn how to master our emotions. And we learn how to master our emotions by learning how to listen to other people into existence. It's through listening to emotions that we actually expand this capacity we have. And when you do that, your life changes in amazing and beautiful ways.
Wow, it's given me a real reaction at the end, and like I say, it resonates so much in my own journey the last few years in my own way. And I just want to thank you for showing up so fully, Doug.
You're welcome.
A very big tapas meal, and just brilliant, honestly. But I really value your vulnerability, your openness, and just the stories you've shared. And it's at a time of real sort of yeah, stuff's changing, right? We are not going to live in a world that we've lived in the last 50 years and 50 years time, thankfully.
I know. I mean, I have a lot of compassion for a lot of people who are struggling with life, and they're struggling with what meaning, and so many people are now living in a world of lack. They don't see the universe as a place of abundance. They see it as a place of limitation. And so I've got my piece of the pie, and I'm going to protect my piece of the pie. And that means if I have to be violent, then I will be. And if I have to exclude you from my world to protect my piece of the pie, that's what I'm going to do. And it's just sad, and it's not completely unnecessary. But, think of it this way. You have political leaders, and I have a criteria for voting. I'm totally independent. I'm probably a centrist, a perfect centrist. But is this person that I'm voting for going to lead me to my higher being? Is this person going to lead me to a place where I'm going to be a better person? Or is this person leading me to my worst self? Fear and anger and separation. And that's how I make my decisions. And if I have to vote and I look at this person and say, where's this person going to lead me? That's the way I vote. It doesn't matter what their political affiliation is. I want to be led by somebody who's high, who's going to lead me to a higher, better place, not somebody who's going to take me down into the mud and have me be hateful and divisive. And I think if we all made that decision, we'd have a different environment that we live in.
Perfect invitation. You gave me 2, so I'm really grateful, Doug. I asked for 1 or 2, and you gave us 2, which is brilliant. So thanks again for joining me. I want to honor your time as you're earlier stateside. But look, thanks for what you're doing.
Thank
you.
Really
great spending time with you. And for anyone that's watching us, again, please do go and check out Doug's website at dougnoll.com. There's also an extra link here as well, which I'm just popping on for anyone that might still be here or watch us back. It's dougnoll.com, DOUGNOLL.com/podcast/Gary Turner, GARY/Turner. Go and have a look there. You can find more about the book, some other information from Doug. And let's stay in contact, Doug. I appreciated the conversation today. It's fantastic.
Absolutely, Gary. It's been fun.
Take care. All the best, everyone. Ciao.